Hello, everyone. My name is Nick Pileski with Utah State University Extension's Integrated Pest Management Program. And today's presentation is going to be on using row covers for pest control. So let's start off the topic by asking ourselves, what is a row cover? I define row covers as a seasonal structure that protects crops from cold temperatures and inclement weather, and they can vary widely in size, shape, materials, and purposes. Now, the term row cover is somewhat of an umbrella term. Row covers are sheets or strips of synthetic, breathable fabric of various weights and mesh diameters. Sometimes greenhouse plastic is also used. And these materials are placed over individual rows with or without wire hoops or over an entire field. And then specifically, floating row covers are unsupported. So these ones are just laid directly on the plant's leaves as the crop grows. So when you hear the term floating row cover, just think of like the fabric laid directly onto the plant. The term low tunnel or caterpillar tunnels are sometimes used. These are seasonal structures that are covered with the same material as maybe a floating row cover, but they have these rigid supports such as metal or plastic tubing or electrical conduit. And low tunnels are typically 2 to 3 feet high and they cover the width of a growing bed. So like the floating row covers, they protect cold hardy crops in the wintertime and early in the spring from cold and wind. And low tunnels are increasingly used for pest management as well. And I also threw in the term mesotunnel because I've seen that used a lot as well. And basically a mesotunnel is kind of a medium size, so a little bit bigger than what we would call a low tunnel or caterpillar tunnel. Ventilation may also be used in caterpillar and low tunnels. So the next structure I want to talk about is hoop houses or high tunnels. And I feel like these terms are sometimes confused with greenhouses. High tunnels or hoop houses, they're more like a simple greenhouse-like structure, and they're usually built over the bare ground. They rely primarily on passive solar heating and passive ventilation. High tunnels generally have steel pipe frames set into the ground and are covered with 1 or 2 layers of greenhouse-grade plastic. They can be irrigated using drip systems, hand watering, or even small sprinklers. Some high tunnel structures have roll-up sidewalls, which they can be hand cranked or sometimes automated. And this allows ventilation in a high tunnel. And they may also have end wall vents or ridge vents. Crops grown in the ground, like raised beds or containers, can also be used in high tunnels. The ground can also be bare, or it may be covered with like a landscape fabric, weed barrier, plastic mulch, or organic mulch like straw. And then lastly, we have greenhouses. So greenhouses are going to be our more permanent structures. So those are typically have like concrete on the floor. And they have electricity running through them. So that allows to keep these structures cool during the hot summer and warm during the wintertime. And these are typically made out of glass or really heavy duty fiberglass. So over the decades, Utah State University has done significant work studying everything and anything about high tunnel structures. You can actually read a lot about their work at tunnel.usu.edu. They have guides on the construction, the economics, and production of high tunnels, along with a lot of tutorial videos of how to build your own high tunnels. But for this presentation today, we're going to solely focus on row covers. So here I listed the 3 main purposes of a row cover. Row covers are used in colder climates, like here in northern Utah, where heat-loving crops are produced kind of on the shoulders of the seasons. Understanding the temperature requirements of the crop and then the ventilating or heating to maintain that temperature is critical, because row covers can be instrumental in retaining heat stored in the soil during the night. So that's why light and temperature is another important function of row covers. And then, of course, the final purpose of row covers is pest control, which is what we're going to dive deep into here in the next few minutes. So as an integrated pest management tool, row covers act as a physical barrier that prevents the movement of pests such as insects, other arthropods, birds, and mammals to the host plant. So physical exclusion is the main purpose. Mechanical control methods are one of the tools that we use in our IPM toolbox. These tactics we can use to physically control the pest. So naturally, row covers are a perfect example of mechanical control, right? They are physical barriers that are used to block or disrupt the movement of pests. So here I listed a lot of common vegetable pests or that row covers can help prevent. So that can include grasshoppers, earwigs, different moths or butterflies, stink bugs, thrips, aphids, slugs and snails, and then a large assortment of beetles. So now let's talk about different cover options that we use in row covers. Row covers are generally made of polyester, polypropylene, or polyethylene. Row covers may be vented or unvented. All materials are fabric-like and generally spun-bound or non-woven. Both may be left on the surface of the soil or can be supported by some sort of structure. So polyester fibers are sometimes spun together with natural fibers to produce a cloth with blended properties. Cotton polyester blends can be strong, wrinkle and tear resistant, and reduce shrinking. Synthetic fibers using polyester have high water, wind, and environmental resistance compared to plant-derived fibers. Woven materials include thicker fabric or mesh, like you see in this picture where insect mesh is used. Insect netting or mesh is available in different grades or sizes. You want to select the mesh grade to ensure the target pest cannot pass through the material. So this table here just lists different size options and then the type of arthropod pests that they can control. So obviously the smaller the grade, the more pests they're going to control. The next material is polyethylene. Polyethylene is probably the most common plastic we use today. Polyethylene is of low strength, hardness, and rigidity, but it has high ductibility and impact strength, as well as low friction. It shows a strong creep under persistent force, which can be reduced by the addition of short fibers. And it kind of has a waxy feel when you touch it. Plastic covered trenches allow for early seeding and plant growth and provide some level of frost protection. Polyethylene is generally stretched across a trench about 7 inches deep, uses a mechanical mulch layer attachment to lay the plastic and mound the soil along the edges to keep the bed and the plastic in place. So I put a picture here of an example of kind of a polyethylene plastic used as a row cover. And then finally, we have polypropylene. It belongs to a group of polyethylenes, which is partially crystalline and non-polar. Its properties are similar to polyethylene, but it can be stretched across, but it's slightly harder and more heat resistant. It's white, mechanically rugged material and has high chemical resistance. So a lot of the agricultural fabrics that you buy for row covers may be made with polypropylene. So now let's go over different structure materials that can be used to support our row covers over the crops. The most common and effective design is just a simple hoop or arch. There are other options that might work better for your situation, including like a boxy frame or an A-frame. But again, typically I just see the arches or the hoops used most commonly. And then obviously some situations don't use structure at all and the materials just laid directly on the plants, like I talked about earlier, and we just use that term as floating row cover because it's just floating on the plants. Wire support hoops. So these are used with row covers or insect nettings to provide support and creating that kind of round tunnel shape. So if you insert like a 6-inch wire into the soil, or so you can, how to set these up is you place about 6 inches of the wire deep into the soil at one end, and about a 76-inch long wire can create hoops that are about 26 inches wide and 16 to 8 inches high at the center. 54-inch wires create hoops that are roughly 26 inches wide and about 10 to 12 inches high at the center. And then wire hoops can be spaced about 5 to 8 feet apart, depending on the kind of space you're working with. The gauge steel used for these hoops has more of a spring, so it creates smooth, uniform, low tunnel hoops without kinking, resulting in less wear on the row covers. Also, they're galvanized, so they can resist corrosion much longer, which corrosion can be like abrasive to the row covers. So wire hoops are a great option. PVC pipe can be bought at any home supply store, and it's a good DIY option for constructing row covers. I use PVC pipes for a lot of my row covers. I personally use like 3/4 of inch pipe, and they can set about up to 3 feet high, which is good for the start of the season for like tomatoes or peppers. The bent PVC was then supported using rebar metal staked into the ground. So I use rebar, but any other kind of a strong metal would work well. On the market, they actually sell metal hoop fenders, so you can cheaply construct structures yourself if you want to use like metal pipe. The bender comes in like different size configurations, so the metal tube can be bent over a variety of different size crops. And the benders, kind of shown here in the picture, can be mounted to any surface for convenience or portability. So here's a photo of an example of the metal hoops used. And obviously this is probably the strongest of all the materials for hoops. Now, when we're sourcing materials, there's a lot of places you can look. I listed here some of the common brands for row covers, like Agribon, Remay, and Ag Fabric are the ones I frequently see, but there's tons of other brands out there as well. And these materials can be purchased online or through garden supply and seed company websites, or even at your local garden store, you might find some. And the price varies on the material, how much you're getting, the time of year you're buying it, and just kind of what location you're based off. When constructing row covers, the first thing you want to do is decide which crop you want to cover. Then you want to identify that purpose of the cover. Like, is it going to be used for frost control or pest control? Next, you want to decide the length and width of the row cover you need. Remember that you're going to need enough row cover to cover both ends of the row. So the structure can be built over the existing beds, the rows with plastic molds and drip line. So then you can install your structure, so the PVC, metal or wire hoops, and then lay the cover over the frame and secure the edge with binder clips or some sort of other clips. And then completely cover the crops on both sides, which we'll talk about that in a second. But then you want to cut the row cover using scissors or a knife, and just make sure that you allow some extra room on the end for the crop growth. Finally, you want to secure the edges with soil, rocks, or other heavy objects. You can even shovel soil or place large rocks about every 3 feet or so along each side of the row cover to exclude insect pests and keep the wind from lifting the cover. Landscape staples are available and they could work to help secure the row cover edges. However, they do have the potential to tear some of the thinner or lower grade fabrics. So that's something to be careful of. So to effectively protect crops from insect pests, you want to lay the row cover over the plants before pests are evident in the area. It's critical to protect the seedlings early in the spring when most adult pests are becoming active again, and then again in late July and early August. Inspect seedlings prior to transplanting to ensure there are no insects in the soil or on the transplants before you do the row covers. So I put together here kind of this chart, and this is just kind of representative of kind of northern Utah and what our growing season looks like. But typically our cole crops and our leafy green crops, those are great crops to use row covers on, especially early in the season to help with frost protection and a lot of those early season pests. And then a lot of our solanaceae crops, if you want to use row covers on them, that could also help with frost protection and early season pests. And some cucumber crops can be used, have row covers as well early in the season. But as the temperatures start to warm, it's important that you don't want to suffocate the plants or allow them to get too hot. So you might want to switch out to a shade cloth or just temporarily take off the row covers. And some crops that require open pollination, you're going to want to remove the row covers to allow pollinators to come in. And then, of course, later in the season, you can use row covers again for protection against the late season frost. So with row covers, there's a lot of things you want to consider. Depending on the location and construction of the row covers, high winds can cause tears in the material or even lift and carry away the row covers. So as a good gardener, homesteader, you should always be mindful of the weather and checking the forecast throughout the growing season. If there's forecasted winds coming, then make sure the row covers are well anchored with those different options we discussed earlier. Next thing you want to consider is the pest life cycles. So even though row covers are used to exclude insects, any insects that do manage to enter the covered area can reproduce rapidly in that protected environment. So you can prevent this by rotating crops by family to avoid laying the row covers over plants where eggs may have been laid the previous year. Regularly check under the row covers for pest problems. And if you do find pests, you want to treat those plants with an improved insecticide or some other IPM method, and remove or discard any infested plant material. Then you want to consider the labor. Row covers require more effort and time early in the season than traditional production methods, especially when they have to be removed to weed, apply pesticides, or allow for pollination. Weeds can grow quickly underneath the row covers, therefore using weed barriers may be helpful. Another option is to occasionally pull back the covers to hoe and hand pull the weeds. If not using drip irrigation, you want to lift the row covers to allow watering. Deer and other animals can damage row covers, so it may be necessary to set up a fence to keep them away from the covered plants. Clean row covers can last longer since the soil particles can abrade and tear these covers. Row covers can also be hosed down at the end of the season, as long as the water is clean, but it's important to let them dry out completely. And then you want to store your row covers indoors or in plastic bags or containers. You want to be careful because mice or other rodents may nest in the row covers if you just leave them randomly in your sheds or barns or garages. And then, of course, let's just review the benefits of row covers. The first was frost protection. Heavier materials like spunbound polypropylene provide better frost protection, but will exclude more light. So use row covers on sensitive crops in the fall for late frost protection. The next is early yields. Row covers can create a greenhouse effect, which warms the air surrounding the plants and the soil temperatures. When combined with black plastic mulch, many crops may mature earlier than other growing practices. And then increased yields. Vegetables that tend to respond well to row covers include cole crops, leafy greens, tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, and even peas. And then, of course, what we talked about a lot is pest control. Row covers exclude insect pests. This leads to less insecticide use and fewer insect vector diseases. Row covers protect plants from birds. And then lastly, water conservation. Less irrigation may be required under row covers since the water collects as condensation on the inside of the cover and returns to the soil. Less crusting occurs since the wind movements and water evaporation are reduced. However, overall water use may increase since crop growth is earlier and greater and occurs over a longer period of time. So row covers are definitely a great option, whether you have a small urban farm or just a small backyard garden. So they're definitely something that you guys should try out for yourselves and kind of test out for yourselves. Like you can decide like how effective row covers are for your property. And if you guys have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me at my email or phone number, and check out our website too at USU extension, or sorry, the extension.usu.edu/pest. We have lots of videos and literature on row covers as well. So thanks, guys.